This is the second part of our series on creating a production-ready Chrome extension. So in this video, we will add the Webpack build tool and TypeScript to our project that we created in the previous video. So let's jump into some prerequisites. So first, we need to make sure we have Node.js, which is a JavaScript runtime installed. We will need it to run Webpack and then any future development tools we'll add. And we also need NPM, which is a package manager for JavaScript. So, for example, I can find the Webpack package here. So in order to check whether these are installed, we just do node-v to see which version we have installed, npm-v to see which version of npm we have installed. Okay, so let's jump in. So we have our code from the previous video. We got our basic Chrome extension with all the files in source. And first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create a package.json file. So it holds basically project information and dependency information. We could just run npm init to create that file, npm init. But in this case, we'll just do it manually. So let's create a new file, package.json, and then we'll put some text in it. Nothing special. Okay, so let's move on to adding Webpack. So what is Webpack? Well, essentially Webpack is a bundler. It takes multiple files with dependency in them and then creates a single file. So in our case, we're gonna have multiple JavaScript files that will then be bundled into a single JavaScript file. Now, in addition to this bundling, it also does some other things like compression and minification for performance reasons. So let's install it. So we're gonna run these commands. We're gonna install Webpack itself, Webpack CLI, because we're gonna be running it from the command line. Webpack merge. Merge is gonna merge our kind of common config and our development config, because we're gonna have two configurations, one for development, one for production. And then this copy plugin, basically just for copying static assets. So let's install all these using this command. So we can look at what happened in our directory. See, we now have a new package.log.json file, which was created by npm, right? And it holds the exact versions of all these dependencies and their subdependencies. And then let's see what happened to our package.json file, which was updated. Package.json, so we see the versions that got installed. All right, let's move on to the configuration. So configuring Webpack, by default, it doesn't really require configuration, but because we're using a Chrome extension and Chrome extension has three parts, so we effectively is gonna have three different bundles. So we need to configure all of that. So let's go ahead and create a new file. We're going to create a file called webpack.common.js. That's where our common configuration is going to be. So we're going to have the background script, content script, and the pop-up scripts. So these are the three bundles we're going to be creating. They're all going to go into this directory. So previously we were loading everything from source. Now we're going to be loading from dist. And then we're going to have a static folder. So some of these files we're not going to mess with at this point. So we're going to move them to a static directory. So let's create a new directory called static. And let's move manifest, manifest.json, and these pop-up CSS, pop-up HTML, let's move them into static. Okay, so we have the common file. Now we're going to create a development config that's going to point to this common config. So this common config is going to be consumed by both development and production config. So let's create new file, webpack.dev.js. That's going to be our development config. So we're going to put development mode here, and we're going to use an inline source map. Inline source map basically just maps our generated JavaScript back to our original JavaScript, and it all does in the single file. So this is often used during development using an inline source map. And then we add our production config. We're going to add our production config. This is our production config. Okay, so where we are now, we've refactored. Are we ready to run the Webpack? Let's try to run it. Go back to our terminal. And we installed Webpack, so by default, it can be run from node modules .bin Webpack, right? That's where it's at. Let's see. Just give me the version. Yeah, gives me some information. Okay, so let's run it --watch. This will leave it running and it's going to watch for changes. --config, and we're going to point to our config webpack.dev.js. Okay, and you see it copied these static assets here, and then it generated content pop-up and background. So let's take a look at our dist directory. So if we go to dist and look at the files there, so we can see all these files. So let's load it. Let's load it. At this point, we can try it out. We can go to extensions. I'm just going to blow away the previous one. Remove my Chrome extension. Yep, that's all good. And then we're in Chrome extensions, developer mode. We're going to click load unpacked. We're going to find the dist directory that we just created, and we're going to select. It's loaded. We're going to go here and pin it, my Chrome extension. So we click on this. So it looks like it's loaded correctly. Before we do any additional testing, let's just move on to TypeScript. So TypeScript basically is a superset of JavaScript that adds static typing and other features. Basically, it is highly recommended to use TypeScript to catch errors early and improve quality because it relies on types. So when you're coding and compiling using Webpack, you're less likely to make mistakes. So in the end, you end up with higher quality code and you catch mistakes earlier. All right, so let's jump into adding TypeScript. Let's stop this server. We're going to come back to it later. We're gonna install also development dependencies. We're going to TypeScript. We're going to add a recommended TypeScript configuration. TS Node, so TypeScript support for Node. Remember, we installed Node as one of our prerequisites. We didn't install it. It's a prerequisite, and this allows Node to use TypeScript. And specifically, we need it because we're going to use TypeScript for a Webpack configuration, right? If we're going TypeScript, might as well use TypeScript for everything we can. TypeScript loader is a loader for Webpack, so it allows Webpack to bundle TypeScript files. And then finally, this types Chrome. It's a type definition, right? So sometimes you are using a JavaScript library and a type definition adds types that you need. So this allows you to use type checking in your code. So we're going to add type checking for our Chrome code that we're using. All right, let's install. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the TypeScript configuration. So TypeScript configuration is in tsconfig.json file. And we're going to basically use the recommended configuration, but in addition to that, we're going to add one more thing. We're going to enable source maps. So a source map maps the source back to our generated JavaScript file. And I will show this later how this works. But basically, in order to debug our code in the browser, it's useful to have a source map, because then it's a one-to-one map between the code we see here in our development environment and what we're debugging in the Chrome browser. All right, and that's all we need for tsconfig. So now let's convert our Webpack configurations, which we just created, from JavaScript to TypeScript. So we just basically rename them, refactor rename to TypeScript. We're just going to rename all of them to TypeScript, to the TS extension. And then we're going to fix them up a little bit in real time. So let's see, common. So this is JavaScript syntax. So let's use the TypeScript syntax. Let's see. Let's do that. And then we're not going to use this module exports. We're going to use the modern export default syntax. So let's just call this config. And we're going to give it a type. This is webpack.configuration type. So now, this type is checking to make sure we're using, the proper types here. Okay. And then we're gonna use this syntax export default config. All right, that's it for the common.ts. Let's move on to dev.ts. Let's change this. To this. We're getting the config from webpack.common. We're going to call it common here to be consistent. Well, let's just call it config for simplicity. Let's not create a new name. But basically it merges two configs. And then we can add a type here. We can tell this that this is a configuration type. By the way, I just noticed something. I'm specifically importing this configuration type for Webpack, which means I can probably do this here, because the only thing I'm using is configuration. Yeah, so this works as well. Okay, what do we have here? And then we're going to use the new export syntax. So, and then we're going to export default merged. Okay, update the production, similar way. Everything good. Okay. And then another thing. So now we can, are we ready to run it? Yeah, let's run it, because I want to run it and I want to show one more thing that we can do to package.json. So let's run it. Okay, so now we are here and we're just going to point it to TypeScript. Let's see. Okay. Looks like there's no changes here, which is expected, but let me blow this away. Rerun this. Yep, all the files are there. All right, so you see how we're using this long command here. So we can be simplified by using the scripts feature or in our package.json file. So here we can add scripts, and it's already recommending me what to add here. Yes, we're going to add build Webpack, but we're just going to point it to the config, and this is now a TypeScript config. Previously, it was JavaScript, and then we're going to add a start Webpack --watch --config. Okay, this is good. So now, instead of using this long command line, we can just run npm run start to do the same thing. Looks like I have a typo here. Webpack dev here, and this is prod. Okay, let's try it again. So this is, I made a mistake. Build start. Start is dev. Build is prod. Got to be careful here. Let's just double check, make sure it's still working. Start using dev config, watching, and npm run build, use the production config. And while we're here, let's look at the production config. The map files are separate, and let's just look at the background.js file. You see this is minified, right? Spaces are all stripped out, it's all in one line, right? So this is optimized for production. Okay, so now we're actually ready to convert the actual JavaScript files that we had to TypeScript. So let's go ahead and just rename them. TypeScript. Refactor rename TypeScript. Refactor rename TypeScript. It's probably going to give us some errors. Okay, so let's see what my IDE is thinking. It says duplicate function implementation. Well, it's because we're using it in multiple files. I'm actually not sure if this is actually going to cause issues. You know, just for experiment purposes, let's just try it. Let's just try building as is and see what happens. Before we do that, we need to update some things. Yeah, let's update our Webpack and then see what happens if we just build this with errors. I'm pretty sure it's not going to work. So to update this, first of all, we need to change these entries to TypeScript. Then we're going to add the TS loader module for Webpack to actually resolve TypeScript files using this TS loader, right? And this TS loader simply points to the TypeScript compiler that we installed. So we can try building, and then we should see some errors, right? So npm run build. Let's see. Yeah, all these errors. So let's go ahead and fix them. Duplicate function. So let's create a new file called common.ts, and we're gonna move this over in that file common.ts, and they're gonna export this. Export, this is Boolean. Yeah, that's a good idea. Here we don't need this use trick. We can import from common, right? And then we're using it here. This looks clean. Let's move on to content file. Okay, we need a type here. Blur element. Let's see, it's needs a type here as well. This is our only other error, okay. This is HTML element. There we go. It's now complaining that this could be null. So this code, let's fix it a little bit. Basically, this is now, this is potential bug, right? It's telling me when we get to this point, this parent could be null. Because over in this function, I'm using it. But if it's null, it's gonna, this is actually a bug, right? So it found a real bug. So let's do a check here for null. If parent equals null, return. So now we don't need to check here. And yeah, are we good? Is this file good? Okay, let's go to the last one. Set batch text, we're gonna import it. Yep. Basically, it's also saying it could be null. So we know it will not be null because this is our code, right? We have this element. Because this enabled element ID is in our popup.html file over here, enabled. So we know that's not going to be null. So if we just do as HTML input element to fix that, and same for this item value as HTML input element. Okay. I think we are ready to run this. Let's do it. npm run start. You can also just do npm start. Start is a special keyword for npm. It just goes and looks for the script that's called start. Okay, code successfully generated. All right, so let's do some playing around. All right, let's go. You don't need to reload it, but I don't think you need to reload it, but I did anyway. All right, so let's do a couple things. So we have this pop-up here, so let's modify it. Let's go over here, HTML, and we're gonna add another thing called item2. Let's see what happens. See, it updated the popup.html here, which means if I go here and I click on it again, I see it's being updated. And we can test our JavaScript. So let's update this file. Let's add some exclamation points. And we see that it regenerated. It knows, right? It's using bundling, so it knows that that comment file is used over here in these two files. So it updated it in real time. So now it's still the old one because we hasn't run yet. Okay, now it ran and we see the new code. So see, it's updating in real time. So it's really handy. So now move on to debugging. So there's three parts, right? So you can debug them in a separate way. Background script with the service worker. The common one is just on the page, and the pop-up is over here. Right click, inspect pop-up. Here we have the pop-up, we have the code here. If we go to sources, go to My Chrome extension, source, and now we see common and pop-up. This is the exact same code that we have in our development environment. Right. This pop-up code. Yep, exact same code. So I can add a breakpoint here, and then I can do something that triggers this breakpoint. So I can examine the values. Over here, if I look at this event, I can examine things here. I can step through it. So all the debug stuff. So, great for debugging bugs in your extension. All right. One more thing I want to mention is that the Chrome type that we added was global. So if I go back to my development environment, and I am using Chrome here, right? Chrome storage sync. So this is a global type, and you see we did not import anything for that type. It's a global type. So for some IDEs, you might need to explicitly add this. So for example, I'm using WebStorm. So here I had to go WebStorm settings, languages, frameworks, JavaScript libraries, and actually add it here, or we might need to download it if it's not present. Because it's a global type, you might need your development environment to be aware of this Chrome type. All right, this has been a pretty long video, and thanks for sticking with it. In the next part, we will continue adding features and development tools to our Chrome extension.